Our next speaker is Micah Altman, who will present patterns of gender and international diversity of editors and editorial boards among journals with open access licenses and open science policies.
Good day, PRC community. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you about this research on diversity in editorial boards. And this is part of a larger project at CREOS, the Center for Research on Equitable and Open Scholarship at MIT, which aims to examine diversity, inclusion, open access, and open science more broadly. And this project more broadly is using open data and data mining to build longitudinal comparable indicators of participation over time. So before we go further, there are a few caveats. This work represents, next. There we go. This work represents my own opinions, not those of our funders, collaborators, etc. And it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future of scholarly communication. So to summarize, if anything in this presentation is wrong, it's entirely my fault. If you like anything in the presentation, come on, next. It is give credit to my collaborators and director and funders, etc. So the motivation for this is that there are clear findings from prior research that science and scholarly communication are increasingly including more open content and also more open science, though progress is mixed, as we're seeing. And open content makes up an increasing percentage of publications, but there's also evidence that inclusion is lacking, that there are within various roles in the scholarly communication publication, there are geographic concentrations, questions about gender balance, and question about language use and even the formats in which things are published. So the project aims at looking at many of these different aspects of participation. This particular study, aims to assemble a large multidisciplinary corpus of journal board characteristics to measure diversity in the scholarly journals editorial boards, and then to look at the association between diversity and journal policies towards open access and open science. This is essentially a descriptive study. I'll walk through the details and approach in a bit more detail. This starts with data collected from scholarly publishers' websites through the Open Editors projects. We built on their data. Through this, we get approximately 475,000 editor or quasi-editor roles. So that includes boards, it includes journal people who are on the editorial board, also on a review board, so peer reviewers in that. There is a lot of cleaning and coding from this data, although we don't have to do the mining part this round. There's a lot of cleanup to do, and once that is done, we apply coding for institution of the actor based on the named institutional affiliation using geoentity extraction, then gazetteers, and gender imputation. We do use genderize.io, we use IPUM's corpus, and do some bootstrapping to do sort of probabilistic analysis of the board gender and to do some robustness tests against different classification algorithms. This results in approximately 14,000 boards. So every journal has a review board, or almost every journal we looked at has some review board that we were able to look at, i.e. the peer reviewers, editors, and then sometimes chief editors are listed. So that's typically the boards are one of those three types and are associated with the journal. We further do disambiguation on journals, link and class them with other databases to flag each journal and thus each board with the field of study, the open access license, and their open science policy based on the DOAJ classifications and the Center for Open Science tops. And then we use descriptive statistics. We use for international diversity, use the HHI index, which is also known as the inverse participation ratio or the Simpson diversity index. Basically, it's the sum of squared proportion of representatives from a class. And for gender, it's the proportion of gender. And then for the descriptive statistics, contingency tables, ANOVA comparisons, bootstrappings for confidence intervals to do fairly robust descriptive differences across those different strata. So let's look at some of these overall differences. As a rough baseline, consider the grand means of diversity across board types. And I think grand means are a little difficult to interpret, but since they're across different strata, but just as a very rough baseline, the grand mean of the percentage of women in tenure track faculty positions about 44%. So this is lower. International diversity, 69.7, even harder to interpret. That means that there's some moderate diversity. What this actually ends up being is that on the grand mean basis, diversity boards don't generally come from all one countries, but there's a short tail. They're coming from the US, turns out they're coming from the US, UK, and a short list of EU countries. And that the HHI index is pretty tolerant of short tail if no one country dominates. We also drill into disciplines. There was a substantial variation across disciplines. The female composition of editorial boards ranged from about 26% in engineering journals, flagged by our research classifications from the Australian Research Evaluation Framework, to 53% in education journals. So it's going, the trends are in the right direction for base validity. And in contrast, the direction was pretty much opposite with international diversity, with engineering boards having some of the higher levels, international 64, education near the bottom. And this is a bigger picture. It is too small for you to see any specific field on this slide, but the paper is up, as is the data, et cetera. So you can drill in, and you can see that there's quite a bit of variation. And I'll just pick out the top parts. So for the central question is, let me advance my slides a little bit, got out of sync. So the central question is to look at the examination, to look at the relationship between diversity as measured here in gender and in international board composition, and open access and open science. And here we have the means of each of these subcategories, whether or not the journal's an open access, has an open access policy, has an open science policy, or both, for each type of diversity and for each board type. And the dots are the means, and the confidence intervals are bootstrapped. Anything that is visually distinctive is going, you can imagine with a sample of this size, is also not there merely by, not rejected as being there by random chance. But let's drill in. So zooming in, we can see that somewhat surprisingly, the open access journals as a whole have substantially worse gender ratio than closed journals. And as we go through as we present in the abstract, there's a very similar pattern with respect to journals following open science policy. And this suggests that openness alone does not solve all of these problems, that we need to look at openness and inclusion with respect to each of the actors. Making readers more diverse does not necessarily make other actors in the scholarly ecosystem more diverse. So drilling in, there's a lot more in the paper, but we'll drill into a few more findings here. Again, the grand mean for gender was 28%. That left, great. We see a difference of 7% for open versus closed journals, a difference of 4% for open science versus no open science. This is a full comparison table, which you can drill in the paper itself. For the slide's a bit cut off on this presentation, but for nationality, you can see that there is differences in the open science editorial board and in review boards and peer reviewers. And so, yeah, we got p-values. But as you can see, with everything, with a sample this large, if you can see a difference, it's there. The full paper is up on Social Archive, and you can read more about this and the project to collect this data and to issue indicators over time at the website.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your enlightening talk on open science and gender diversity or diversity in general. As a member of the, I should say my name, Wolfgang Kursen of Michigan State University. As a member of the open source and open science community, I want to make clear here that open access does not mean open science. Open access is a pricing issue of the journal, and you can still publish things in there that are not open science at all, where the code and the data are hidden, are hidden in the lab and are not open in the community. So it would be interesting to know, like, what do you mean by open science versus open access?
So your question is, how did we classify open science versus open access? So we, for open access, we classified it based on the license under which the content is available. As you said, it's about IP, not about practice. And that was based on matching the journal to entry in the Directory of Open Access Journal, obtaining license. So we do not include hybrid articles where, you know, a journal may publish some articles as open access, but not others. So we are treating as open access journals that publish all of their articles as open, with a permissive license that's recognized. For open science, we use the Center for Open Science top evaluations. And they have a number of criteria for things like data availability policies, disclosure, etc., to look at the process of transparency around the journal and rank different journals. So these are different attributes that we're using different labels for.
And so in your findings, is what are the, sorry, I mean, I maybe.
So the findings are stronger for open access journals, but generally they're neither is going in a, neither open access nor open science journals have higher level of gender diversity. They tend to have lower level, but have, in at least for some boards, higher level of international diversity.
Thank you
And
very
the
much.
effect is stronger for open access journals, but it's there for open science. And details are in the paper, and you can see each of these categories split out there.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Hi, Tony Ross-Hallauer, Graz University of Technology.
Hey, John.
Two questions, if I may. The open editors kind of corpus, I looked into it last year, I think, and found it was quite selective. And so it was obvious that it was the publishers that they could easily scrape. And so I just wonder, how you think that might have skewed your results, that certain publishers were in and not. And then the second is, I remember that Crossref announced that they were looking to do something quite innovative for them, which is collect journal level data about editorial boards. And I'm just wondering if your efforts are kind of linked into that, and if how you see the prospects for this kind of metadata collection proceeding. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks, Tony. And I know from your past work that you have a lot of experience in how like messy this data can be and the issues of wrestling with it. The Open Editors Project does cover many of the major publishers, but not all of them. And for example, it doesn't include the BMG group. Wiley was not included in this round. We did not see specific publisher level effects that were, distinguishable based on that. And it was there is a missing data problem, but there is not right now alternate information on the contents of editorial boards to baseline. So this is the largest corpus and then the broadest one available, and we did some cleanup and robustness checks and I say that, like, no matter how we were able to slice the data, the overall directionality and substance of the findings remain there, that you can get some fields to shift around. In terms of cross-reference activities, we're not closely connected to this. I applaud it. I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, I used to be part of the ORCID board. In the perfect world, all of the articles and all of your academic roles would be associated with an ORCID, and you would have, and although there are reasons ORCID has not done this for data privacy issues, you would be able to self-represent gender or contribute in a statistically but privacy preserving way to studies that allow us to analyze gender. There's a lot of noise in doing the tracking the author and when we do things like trying to do which was not demonstrated in this slide but is in the paper, clustering across review boards, you have to disambiguate author names to identities. And so this is all made easier if we do this at the beginning in a systematic way, and in which the researcher, the author, has some control over it. And that will also allow things like people who wish to present as non-binary to present that as a gender, and that's impossible to capture in this imputation method.
Hi, Anita de Waard, Elsevier. Thank you, Micah. Great data set and statistics. I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about what you were expecting to find, and also if you have any thoughts on, causal relationships. So what caused this to be the case? Do you think there is a causal relationship between openness and gender representation, internationality, and all of that? So I'd be interested in that.
Well, I mean, the framing of the general research project is to understand who participates where and how that work is used, and sort of how does that vary across fields. So it's still very much, we came in with descriptive questions rather than a specific causal hypothesis. There is sort of a folk theory, or advocates have argued that open makes everything better. Not all advocates, and I'm not saying that's the mean position, but so if that was that is a position that is put out, and so one question was, what do we see? Do we see the same level of increase in readership, in participation in production as in participation in consumption? And so to the extent that there's a receive wisdom, this goes a little bit counter to that. But I wouldn't say that there's, that there's well-founded research stating that. Second, in terms of causal relationships, causality is really complicated, and and really one has to think about not causality in general, but where are the opportunities to intervene, and what opportunities could you consider and what might the effects of those interventions be? So if we're thinking about like interventions around recruiting editors to editorial boards, once that is different from interventions in which open practices are introduced in grad school, and that changes how how science is evaluated, et cetera. Those are very different ways of describing an intervention. You could talk about whether either of those would have a strong effect on international participation or gender, whether they have a bias in one direction or another. But it's very important to distinguish between those two things. And there are other researchers in our group who are looking at things like whether there is an immediate bias in the selection of references for a bibliography. Do authors, when they, regardless of like biases for a field to be male dominated or female dominated, but even if you take that as the baseline, are there additional differences in what we would expect versus those existing baselines and citation lists? So we're looking at that sort of next layer up.
Well, thank you, Micah.